Dear brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great joy to welcome you all on behalf of the World Council of Churches. Those who are joining us online from all over the world, most welcome. And those who are over here in presence with us at the Ecumenical Center in Geneva. I welcome you to this book discussion on the WCC publication Ahead of Her Time, Pan-African Woman of Faith and the Vision of Christian Unity, Mission and Justice. Written by the Reverend Dr. Angélique Keturah Walker-Smith, who is with us here today. Most welcome. It is an honor to have you with us in person and to have a wonderful book discussion with you. A book selling will take place also after our 60-minute encounter. My name is Benjamin Simon. I am the World Council of Churches Director for Education and Ecumenical Formation and Dean at the Ecumenical Institute at WCC. I have the joy to co-moderate this one-hour book discussion with my colleagues, Professor Dr. Angélique Keturah, bienvenue, welcome, who serves as the director of the academic programs at GlobeEthics.net Foundation in Geneva. She has published extensively on ethics, migration, and world Christianity. And it is my joy also to introduce you to my WCC colleague, Mrs. Lynn van Rooyen, based in South Africa, who will moderate the chat and all the online questions coming in. Most welcome, dear Lynn. And by the way, Lynn is also responsible for all the production work at WCC, including this wonderful book. Thank you for the work that you have done here. The title of the book speaks already for itself, Ahead of Her Time. Those women influenced others at their time and their contexts, but also young women leaders in our days today are influenced and guided by their legacy. Next 60 minutes, we will hear more from these Pan-African women of faith who were and are inspiring ecumenical leaders to all of us. We will first listen to some words of greetings before interviewing the author and hearing about her motivation to write the book, which will then lead us to listening to the inspired and inspiring next generation of Pan-African ecumenical women leaders. To conclude with a project on Black presence in the ecumenical archives, as well as Q&As from all of you over here in in Geneva, and also online with the chat. Dear Amélie, who sent us greetings?
Thank you very much, dear Benjamin. It's an immense privilege and pleasure to be here together with you at this occasion, and particularly with Angélique, with whom I have journeyed together, the journey of the Pan-African women of faith. And to see this publication today is really a wonderful event and occasion to celebrate together. Let us listen to two video recordings that we received. The first one from Reverend Dr. Yvonne Delk, also portrayed by Angélique in her publication, educator, social justice leader, and first ordained Black woman of the United Church of Christ. Because she was so impressed by the way she intertwined spirituality, family, and dedication to an environment that she experienced as broken and divided. No matter where life takes you, remember who you are and whose you are. End of quote. And the second recording comes to us from Dr. Brigadia Bam, likewise a prominent theologian and ecumenical leader from South Africa, also deeply part of our ecumenical history, or shall I say herstory. She was a long-standing companion also of Mercy Oduyoye and was part of the circle of concerned African women theologians. And as a matter of fact, she served the World Council of Churches for many years in its department for women. So now please listen to these contributions from Dr. Yvonne Delk and Dr. Brigadia.
Good morning to all of you who are gathering for this special event. And I greet you in the name and spirit of women who in the past and the present have worked in the ecumenical movement. And I especially greet you in gratitude to Angélique Walker-Smith, who have recorded many of the stories of those women in her book, Ahead of Her Time. I'm so grateful to be one of those women that she has included. I'm thinking right now of the year 1984, when I was appointed by my president of my denomination to be a part of the World Council of Churches. It was a memorable moment, and I would be a part of that ecumenical movement from 1984 until 1994 with the program to combat racism. It was a significant moment in my time. There are three things that mean so much to me. One, my faith, my family, and freedom. And for 10 years, 1984 to 1994, I was able to live out my faith as we worked to combat racism and apartheid, not only in South Africa, but in many places of the globe. I was also able to extend my family by meeting many globally who welcomed me into their hearts and into their homes as we together worked to combat racism wherever we found it. And freedom, the freedom to continue to witness to what we believe as women. Mary McLeod Bethune said, our lives are a gift from God, but what we do with our lives is our gift back. I'm so grateful that for those 10 years, I was able to work in an ecumenical environment where I was mentored myself by a person like Annie Joggi, where I got to work with people like Jean Sendab and Deborah Robinson and persons like Mara Lee Schooler. And we created something called Sisters in the Struggle to eliminate racism. Together, we were able to make an impact on our time. I'm now celebrating my 85th year of life, but I live now in the warmth of those moments where I was able to be a part of a significant movement for justice. I greet you as you gather for this ecumenical moment, and I pray that the women that come in your life will have as many and much meaning as the women in the ecumenical movement have had for me. So greetings, and I pray this will be a wonderful event for you. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the people who have made this wonderful arrangement that gives me an opportunity to convey a message to all of you. And it's amazing what technology has brought to this world. So we are thankful to those who are able to manage it. My particular thanks goes to the World Council of Churches, which really is one of my many spiritual homes. Over the years, I was privileged to be part of even an ecumenical group in the continent, my own continent in Africa, in Uganda, in 1963. That is a very, very long time, but that was the opportunity for me to meet women of the African continent in a gathering that took place at that time. I want to say to all of us, we are living through very, very exciting times of many changes, where we are attempting, all of us, to be a world community. And this world community, which we are also in the continent part of, is putting new challenges to all of us. And one of those greatest challenges is peace. And we happen to be at a very difficult time now in the world with the peace. And this is a concern because it affects all of us. If a war takes place in one place, then it affects all of us. And I hope that we will try as individuals and as a collective to always remember those people who have to make these very difficult decisions and the challenges they are facing, so that we can stop the war and make sure that every human being has a right to live, because the life is given to us by God. And I want to say to the women who are gathering, not only gathering for themselves, but gathering for the world. But women, I believe, have a special place. I think through creation, God wanted us to be a kind of people we are, wanted us to bring the kind of passion that we bring to the world, and a kind of faith of the preservation of people. And I see that that challenge will remain the greatest challenge to many generations to come. That life will remain an important element of our being. Yes, indeed, there are other joys that are there, but every one of us, created in God's image, has a right to live. And so I say to you, let's continue to pray for peace. Let's preserve many people who are living.
Thank you so much. These were very powerful contributions, reminding us of the importance of this movement, not only for a specific group, but for us as humans as a whole, reminding us of the importance of peace and justice, the preservation of life. Benjamin, I think these are important keywords, certainly also for your conversation with Angélique now. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amelie. Yes, indeed. And in preparation for this afternoon, I was reading the book again, and there was one passage which struck me a lot. Let me read those 3 sentences briefly to you. Page 15. The overwhelming evidence of Pan-African women of faith being disproportionality affected by the colonial challenges of legally codified and institutional racism, sexism, classism, and other structural inequities in the early to mid-1900s, and more specifically 1948 to 1983, raises the following question: how is it that these women, despite their invisibility and marginalization, and their narratives in church and ecumenical and social history, emerge to lead in their churches and ecumenical organizations and movements ahead of what is arguably their expected time? How was this possible during some of the most entrenched colonial periods that were born and raised in it? Dear Reverend Dr. Angélique Keturah Walker-Smith, is this what motivated you to collect all those stories, or what exactly motivated you to record, to collect all these stories, to write this wonderful book?
Thank you, dear colleagues, and I'm so honored to have everyone here in this moment. I see friends old and new, and I am truly honored to be a servant, a scribe of these women's stories. That's how I perceive my role as a scribe, a narrator of what has happened in our ecumenical and church history, as well as Pan-African history. Thank you. I would say that that is the fundamental question. How was it possible that this could happen? Africa still not at the point of independence in the various nation states. Post 1884-85 of the Berlin Conference that we know divided the continent of Africa. After the transatlantic slave trade and other slave trades, I might add, that had transpired that affected people of African descent. Those coming out of the enslavement period in the Americas. How was it possible that you have the gift of these women? I am pleased to say that the women in this book are also in kinship with my mother, the great-granddaughter of those who were enslaved. My mother, who taught me, don't forget the women. My godmother from Liberia, who also felt the same, who I met at age 6 when I was a very young girl. And then, of course, my father, who was a Pan-African from the beginning. He went to both Wilberforce Payne Theological Seminary and also Central State. We're located in a very racist town called Cedarville, Ohio. But he in his library as a pastor in my national church, the National Baptist Convention, USA Incorporated, which I represent in this World Council of Churches space, he was always Pan-African. I spent time with him, my parents as a daughter of the First Lady and the pastor. So all of those confluences came together that was planted when I was born, literally, with my parents. I didn't know any other way to be, and I still don't know any other way to be. So the seeds were planted in the womb. The seeds were planted in my DNA. I don't know any other way really to be. But all of that to say that all these contributory issues contribute to the vision of faith. And that's how I was raised. That's what I still believe, that whatever perspectives we bring from the global community is still about the faith. How are we living our lives for God? How are we living our lives for the faith? So that's the impetus. Now, that being said, there are always, if you will, catalysts along the way in the journey, isn't it? So born that way, living in the study of my father, really while he was a student and in that kind of very restricted space in terms of discipline every day, pastor's daughter, I think some of you know that story. I learned discipline very early, and I learned very early that when people who didn't look like me did not welcome me, where I was integrating schools, that God was still with me and on my side. So all of those things contributed to my being able to have a heart to receive and even think about these stories. So many of the things that we are were planted in the womb and then planted at the birth. And that is certainly my witness today. But again, that being said, as I grew in the faith, grew in these very racist environments, and eventually made my way to Kent State University, I began to pick up language that could help me translate better what was in my heart. And I studied Pan-African Studies at Kent State University, gave me great language. They helped me in my Pan-African journey, and was one of the graduates there from the Institute. Went from there to Yale, learned more about the faith and the formation of ecumenical and church history faith, and was blessed to go on to Princeton for my doctoral studies to help me to articulate at another level, how do you talk about hospitality? All those things contributed to my being more open to being able to receive and to acknowledge women that look like me, who had a journey similar to the journey I had. That being said, I was still a young woman when I became the executive of the Council of Churches in Trenton, New Jersey. And in Trenton, New Jersey, unfortunately, there just weren't a lot of women like me as an executive in those days. And as it turned out, World Council of Churches invited me and celebrated my leadership in my 20s, coming out of Yale Divinity School in that executive leadership. National Council invited me. Partners in Ecumenism invited me. And there I found myself in Seoul, Korea for the Justice, Peace, Integrity of Creation meeting. Some of you know about that. And then we went on to the assembly. I was invited to be a delegate from my national church at the Canberra, Australia meeting of the assembly, my first World Assembly. And I show up there 2 days late. I was 2 days late. And that's because there was a war going on and our church couldn't make up their mind if they were going to go, and there were other churches that weren't. But this was a real trigger. I showed up across the international date line, going to Australia. I'd never been to the Pacific. I'm like, where am I going? By myself. And I land in this place called Sydney, Australia. I made my way up to the meeting in Canberra because you had to go farther from Sydney to get to Canberra. And so I arrived there and I land in this meeting because I'm like, I'm late. I get to the meeting. There's a room of all these people from around the world in this wonderful ecumenical space. But unfortunately, I'm so sorry, there was no order to the conversation. Everyone was just talking amongst themselves and the poor moderator was trying to mind himself and it wasn't happening. So all of us were like, is someone going to put us out of our misery here? And it happened. So they dismissed us, came back into the room, sat down in my chair of 12, because the other 11 were not coming because of the war. And there she was at the door. I am not kidding you. Some of you may have been there. She walked into the door and there was a hush in the room. She just arrested the room. I said, and the other moderator was not looking like her. It was a man and he was from Europe. I said, how is it she walks in the room in her beautiful regalia, her cane of African descent, and arrests the room with a hush? And she goes to the podium, she says, this meeting is called to order. It was the Dom, Nita Barrow. She was the World Council of Churches president. I know there's some folks from the Caribbean up in here, but she was the World Council of Churches president from Caribbean and Latin America. She arrested the room. You could hear a pin drop. The rest of the conversation was ceased and the meeting was called to order. And I said to myself as a young woman in her very young age, I said, I want to be like her when I honestly, and I recall this story in the book, but that was a catalyst because I'm maturing. I'm an executive. I've been to school. I've been planted in the womb to think about these things. And I said, I'm on a path. I'm on a journey to find the other Dom Nita Barrows in this family of ecumenical life. That was I could tell you many more, but that was one of the ones that really set me on a course that I must find other women like the Dom Nita Barrows. And so I've been looking ever since. And one day I finally had the courage to say, I have to take a break and write it up. I have to interview the women while they're still here. Most of the women in the book are women that either mentored me or took me under their wing or encouraged me in some way, gave me a smile or met with me for coffee. But that was not the primary criteria, although that was helpful. They had to be born by 1939. If they hadn't been born by 1939, that was not the period I wanted to look at. And Dr. Yvonne Delk is actually the gateway to the second generations, as I name it in my book. The other women are the first generation. And I need to say there are other women, but I didn't have time or the resources to write all of that up. But you have a pretty good bibliography. I say this in my other interview, and you can pursue it on your own, or I'm happy to chat with you because I still have all my files on all these amazing women. And I'm honored to be able to just, again, as the Book of Acts talks about, to be a scribe, to be a narrator, to say, here are some women whose stories must be told if we're to tell church history, ecumenical life, and women.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Dr. Angélique, thank you very much for this profound testimony. And you are all welcome to download the book for free on the website, to buy it over here, to work with it, and to use the material which is in this wonderful book. But now we are curious to learn a little bit more about the next generations. Therefore, I hand over to my colleague Amélie.
Thanks very much, Benjamin, and once again, Angélique, for your testimony and also for describing how really this is ingrained in your ecumenical journey. I think this cannot be understated how important it is. And also to ask this question today, because it's all too easy to perhaps consider this as a closed chapter, as something that is in the past. But this is exactly the transition we want to make. And I know this is also a topic close to your hearts. How do we inspire and encourage future generations of women leaders of Pan-African descent? And this will be now our focus in the conversation with representatives of this younger generation of emerging Pan-African women leaders. And I'm surrounded by them. Two are here with us today, and one has sent us a message. I would like to begin with Reverend Jackie McKenna, who is from Kenya. She is currently at the Ecumenical Institute in Bosse, and she has briefly shared with me already what an important research she conducts there, but also to underline that she is a leader. She is the vice moderator of the Faith and Order Commission, and as such, she certainly has something very important to share with us on how ahead of her time resonates. Becky, what do you think?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and also contribute to how this book, Ahead of Her Time, has inspired me and many others in one way or the other. I think your story resonates so well with my story. And I'll begin by quoting Hartov, who says, "If you want to know me, then you must know my story. For my story defines who I am. And if I want to know myself, to gain insights into the meaning of my own life, then I too come to know my story." The stories written in this book are stories of great women. Women who strategically created spaces for upcoming generation of Pan-African women. And this is the very reason why some of us are seated here today. In this book, when I began reading it, there's a quote that really caught my attention. It's a quote that was made during the burial of Anita. It says, "Nita helped women equip themselves to have their own identity, their integrity in equity with men. And she did this with her own shining example." I think these great women that this book recounts are women who created, as I've said, spaces for other women to come with their identity. They didn't want these women to come looking like them, but each of us to come with our identity to offer on the table what we have. And as a young woman who joined the ecumenical movement recently, I was inspired by our very own Agnes Abwom. I started that, my first encounter with WCC was just recently at the 11th Assembly in Kaswe. I was serving there as a steward. And the very first person who opened the steward meeting was a speech of Agnes Abwom. And our opening remarks really caught my heart. She said, "I began the journey in ecumenism at the 5th Assembly in Nairobi as a steward." And I said in my heart, I want to be like Agnes Abwom. I didn't know that it would take a very short time for me to start also walking this journey. Another woman who has been very instrumental in my life, who started mentoring me when I was pretty young, 17 years old, is Professor Esther Mombo. By that time, she was the vice moderator of ecumenical theological education. Little did she know, I think there's an interview she did with Marianne 6 years ago, and one of the things that she said, the future of ecumenism is actively engaging young people, not only using them as rapporteurs, but also having a seat for them on the table, a seat for them to engage like any other person. Esther little knew that our own mentee will have a seat on the table, and she started mentoring me. I would say what she did and she's doing with so many of us is intentionally engaging and involving us. And I think this is what the women in Ahead of Our Time are doing. And as I conclude, There are two things that this book has enabled me to really put in my heart as I continue with the leadership journey at the ecumenical movement is to reform and transform and contribute to the broader table of ecumenical conversation. I was given a chance. I'm a product of mentorship, and also I should do the same by holding the hands of others who are behind me, by living as a shining example, like Mita and many others, and Angélique here. Another personality who really has been a source of motivation, inspiration in my life is Professor Mercy Amba Oduyoye.
Yes, that's right.
I think for Professor Mercy, she's so far. And I think she said a one-winged bird cannot fly. For the ecumenical movement to be the ecumenical movement that we are, where everybody is included, where human dignity and justice are, then we need the two wings of the bird. We need both men and women. We need both young and old. We need all people from all walks of life. And she did this practically by foregrounding the voices of African women. And you've recounted that very well in your book. So I think for me, that is what has inspired me. I'm learning so many lessons, even as I contribute and engage at the ecumenical movement. And I want also to tell you that the journey is not over. We are continuing with the journey, and also we are role models to those who are coming after us. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Reverend Jackie, for these words. Mentorship, involvement, inclusion, and visibility. We shall think about those words that you gave us. As we listen now to Eva Kelly Abel, she has sent us a recorded message from Kenya, where she is a religious educator and Swahili teacher. She has also studied at the Ecumenical Institute before, and she is very invested in research, very specific topic of the care of fistula of women and destigmatizing this, particularly in faith communities. We listen to Eva.
Hello everyone, greetings from the Global Christian Forum Gathering in Accra, Ghana. To the people in Bose on this special occasion where we are launching Dr. Angélique's book, Ahead of Her Time. I got to meet Dr. Angélique during the 11th World Assembly. I was attending as a Bose student, all of us attended. And this was very special because it's the first time that Bose students got the opportunity to attend a World Assembly. I sat next to her in a bus, in a train, where we were going for an ecumenical excursion in the border of France and Germany. And we just talked for 1 hour. I think she told me about her work with the Pan-African women, and she also told me about the book that she was writing. Then I later met her in Bose when she came for meetings with the World Council of Churches, and every time she would tell me about her book, and congratulations, here we are launching this book. This is a very unique book because Dr. Angélique gives stories of how women, Pan-African women, were involved in ecumenism in the 11th World Assemblies. One of the most important things that strikes me is the consistency of Pan-African women in ecumenical gatherings. For instance, Dr. Agnes Abum, may she rest in peace, she has been attending the World Assemblies since 1975. Dr. Angélique herself, when you read the book, you can tell her personal encounters with these women. So that's one of the things I learned, that in ecumenism there's need to be consistent so as you can be able to see the fruits. Also, Dr. Mercy Amber Odie, she's been consistent as a researcher in traditional African religions. In pursuit for gender justice, she began the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Yeah, and I was also happy to see her 2 days ago attending this gathering. So that consistency, you can tell, is out of a passion for ecumenism that these women have, which inspires me as a young ecumenical theologian. Something else that I get from this book ahead of our time, it's important to be found in places where there's ecumenical gatherings. I think that is the first step, because it's in this place that you interact with people who are ecumenically involved, you learn from them. Also, being present, you are able to pick up some of the emerging issues that are at the heart of the ecumenical movement. And also, you know, ecumenism is not easy when it's not something that you can do in isolation. So being present in ecumenical gatherings helps you to meet with people who you are of the same, pursuing the same interests, and that kind of helps you to continue being engaged in the ecumenical movement. Yeah, I think this book also brings out, you can see pursuit for justice, and especially for me, gender justice, racial justice, which comes out very, very vividly. And being in the ecumenical movement, and also these books brings out, because you are able to get these themes coming out, and you see the way women have been very consistent in fighting for these positions and spaces that we women are now enjoying. I joined Pan-African Women Ecumenical Network in 2022. Dr. Angélique invited me. I honestly didn't know why I got into this movement, maybe just to quench some ecumenical curiosity, but I would say it's been very inspiring. I'm still trying to find my place, but attending monthly meetings, interacting with sisters. And I think yesterday we went to the Cape Coast Slavery Castle. I think that has also ignited my passion for racial justice and decolonization, because I saw what ancestors went through. And this is a journey of resilience. The torture I saw, those people who made it to the Americas and to the Caribbean must have been very resilient people. And it's the high time that we advocate for justice, so that their descendants don't keep experiencing the same injustices that our ancestors experienced.
We thank Eva Kenny Abel for this contribution. I think we see as a continuous thread persistency. It's so important to see that it's not a one-off achievement, but it's a long journey. And it's also about discovering topics that are intersectional and transversal. We have heard about gender justice and racial justice, and I think this comes very clearly through these stories and the way it resonates with today's women leaders of Pan-African descent. I turn now to my right to Dr. Priscilla Ankra and welcome her, thank her to speak to us on what her impressions are reading ahead of her time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. And I often ask myself, how and why God has blessed me to be surrounded by such amazing, powerful, and vibrant women pushing for a just world and heaven here on earth. When I was asked to prepare for this, the Holy Spirit kept pushing me to reflect on not just the book, but the author, Dr. Reverend Angélique Walker-Smith. So I first met Reverend Walker-Smith at the first permanent forum for people of African descent. That was my first encounter with her and my first encounter with WCC. There was a fierceness and a quiet power about her that reminded me of my West African grandmother from Ghana and aunt, who lived out their faith in simple but radical ways. They gave to the community, they made a home for orphans, and they fed the hungry in our home in Atlanta, Ghana. When I recognized that spirit in Reverend Walker-Smith, I could not turn away. And God kept connecting us through AGNA, a Pan-African Advocacy Network, where I was able to encounter the full breadth and brilliance of Dr. Reverend Smith's power and her unapologetic fight against anti-Black racism and colonial oppression. You see, I was raised with the belief that a good Christian woman is quiet, light, and accepts the long suffering in hopes of a better place, a heaven beyond this place, after death. But never before had I met a Black woman who was unapologetic about being Black and boldly calling for a better world for all of us here on earth now, in the name of God. The word of God compels us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. It is a daily challenge to push us to expand the limits of our imagination into what God's limitless imagination is. And so when I encountered Dr. Reverend Walker-Smith, my imagination, my mind has been forever renewed about what a life can be, unapologetically marching forward in the seeking for liberation and justice and walking out our faith. So it is not easy to dare to dream and to become who God wants you to be in this lifetime. It is not easy to do this in a body of a Black woman. But God is faithful and sends his angels and encourages us to strengthen us in our march towards liberation. So Reverend Walker-Smith, I carry your example with me, and I thank you for writing this book, and I thank you for who and all you are. Thank you.
Dr. Priscilla is the director of the Priority Africa Network. I forgot to mention this, and we thank her also for her contribution in which she highlights how important connections are, and to see the power, the strength of Pan-African women in their struggle for liberation. And to lead a life for the liberation of all that transcends also generations. And I think all three contributions carried this message that the women we encounter in your book, Angélique, are in fact our living icons. They are living into the future also through these younger women leaders. And I think this makes us particularly proud to witness this and to see that this is really embedded in the ecumenical journey. Thank you so much, and over to Benjamin.
Thank you. Truly a rich and stimulating afternoon. Thank you so much to you all. Before coming to a Q&A part, where I especially would like to invite also our friends who are joining us online, I would like to introduce you to my WCC colleague, Dr. Masiba Unda, sitting on my right. He is the WCC Program Executive for the Program for Overcoming Racism, Xenophobia, and Related Discrimination. And he also serves as adjunct professor at the Ecumenical Institute in Marseille. And Masiba, you do explore the reality and opportunities that are in the WCC archives. So there's not only dust over there, but also lots of material, also important for us this afternoon. And we are very curious to learn a little bit more about this project.
Thank you. I think I should begin by saying there is no project. Yes, but there are archives at the WCC, but there are archives everywhere where we are coming from. And I want to begin by quoting a friend and a brother, Michael Jagasa, who says, archives are a bloody crime scene. Yes. Archives are a bloody crime scene because archives contain a lot of themes, some of which might traumatize us because they carry the scars and the wounds and the traumas of our ancestors. But we cannot bury the archives. And I am very grateful. I've not yet read this, but looking at the front page, the cover page of this book, these are archives, excavated, decolonized, repaired. There's a lot that can be done with the archives. The archives tell a story of the way our forefathers, in this particular book, our foremothers, related to each other, what they thought of the other, especially as Europeans went into the newly known world, where they encountered people, cultures, social, economic, and political systems different from their own. Being in the archives is not always for the faint-hearted because it is a crime scene. The archives, however, are also a repository of evidence of what happened in the past, most of which might make us shudder at the explicit prejudices, discrimination, exploitation that accompanied the so-called success stories of the past. What more, the archives carry the scars, but also the pride of the resilience of an exploited and oppressed people. People who were erased in history, they're kept in the archives. People whose identities were erased and yet they resisted. And through the archives, they speak to us. The archives are the ancestral resting places from whence the ancestors are calling upon us. So in thinking about the 75 years of the WCC's existence, and at the same time marking the International Day for People of African Descent, which is 31st of August in 2023, my colleague and sister, Reverend Nicole Ashwood, and myself decided to think outside the box. When we think of ecumenical gatherings, naturally we think of white Europeans. And so we termed that particular event, they too were gathered. And so what we did is really scratch the surface of the WCC archives. That's why I say there's no project. And I think the project must now be there because we only scratched the surface and we realized indeed, one of the most shocking discoveries for me was the realization that the first ever young person to address a WCC assembly was actually a Black man called Philip Porter. 1948, the very first assembly. But this was unknown to me. I could not imagine a Black person taking the podium at the very first assembly, which I always assumed was a very European affair. But the archives speak to us. So it became very clear that there is a lot that we can discover if we dare go into the archives and allow the ancestors to speak to us. Sometimes ancestors speak by being silent. Sometimes ancestors speak to us in ways that we did not envisage. But the archives are their resting places. They were hidden in the archives. It is our responsibility and duty to our ancestors to rebury them by decolonizing our archives, investigating the archives even more. And I'm grateful, Reverend Dr. Angélique, that you have laid the foundation for a revisiting of the archives, because indeed there is a story to be told. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you so very much, Dr. Masiba. And yeah, maybe we can find one or two doctoral students one day sponsored by somebody of you to go into the archives and do that research, which is so important. And we are really at the beginning, thanks to the book Ahead of Her Time. I would like to hand over to our co-moderator, Lynn. You have probably many remarks and questions in the chat. We have another 10 minutes, and it would be nice to include also our people on the screen, our colleagues on the screen.
Thank you, Benjamin. The first person who asked to be heard is our Metropolitan Seraphim. And if he unmutes his mic, we will ask him to speak.
Thank you very much. First of all, the book of Angélique is like as you are with her. So when I started reading the first lines, I couldn't stop until to end the book. Secondly, as Dr. Jerry expressed all of us, he said very shortly, this book is a reference to women change the world. And then Dr. Agnes, she emphasized their role on unity, mission, and justice. And that was the whole history of WCC is about unity, mission, and justice. So we can say that they are flesh of my flesh. They are the natural members of the body of WCC, these ladies. And then Dr. Angélique emphasized that these ladies not spoke and wrote, but the most important, they acted. They were the women of action. And this reminds us what happened in the first Christian community when the Christians, they were together sharing, and there was not any suffering among them. Today, you remember in our last assembly, we were talking about to be together, share stories. No, we have to share also our things. And the Christians are rich, many Christians. We have to share with the other people who suffer and they don't have water and food. This is the message for these ladies. Number 3, and I finish, the relation Angélique mentioned between these ladies and their involvement during the students, when they were students, how they organized the first Christian organizations. And it was like an ecumenical catechesis for these ladies. So the youth should be there. And I am happy that the last Central Committee and the General Assembly emphasized how to get more youth in our movement. And then they emphasize the gift of hospitality, something we need today to deal with the problems of the immigrants. And finally, I like to mention the relation of Ubuntu, Harare, Harambe in Kenya, and metanoia. Dr. Angélique, she said the best way to show the respect to these ladies, on page 109, she mentioned that we have to show metanoia. And then she analyzed the meaning of Ubuntu on page 112. And she says Ubuntu means to restore justice, to give back what we stole from the indigenous people, their land, their rights. And so for me, metanoia, Ubuntu, there is relation. And in fact, it's the story of Zacchaeus. Thank you to our moderator, Benjamin. And as a member of the previous commission, of this commission, now you are responsible. I feel very proud for the two ladies who were working together, Mele and Angélique, in order to come to this point and to consider this book as the beginning, not the end. How not to give 20 or 30% participation of women, but 50%, because half of the population are women, and the other half, the men, we come from women. And the first person we respect after the Holy Trinity is Panagia. So we have to give more space in equal and through the Constitution to women. Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you so much, Metropolitan Seraphim. That's the only question we have, or the only comment we have online at the moment, Benjamin. So back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Your Eminence. Friends, the floor is open. We have another 5 minutes. Maybe there are some comments, remarks, questions from your side. It's the opportunity now to address the author. Yes, Dr. Ba.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to be here today and also to have. Okay, I'm so pleased to be here today. And again, okay, I'm Bishop Dr. Pius Ba. I'm the visionary of the Revived Christian Church International, based in Cameroon. I'm so happy to be here today and to be able to get to know the book in question, which is being kind of launched today, talking about the issues of women. I'm just thinking about the story of our Lord Jesus Christ, because when he resurrected from the dead, the men were in hiding. It was the women who were at the tomb to have the first Easter experience. And even when they came back to tell the story to the men, they couldn't even believe. They didn't even believe the women. And we see that the gospel message of Jesus Christ, the women always be at the forefront. And you find out also that when Jesus was on his way to the cross, except in the Gospel of John, where the Bible says that John was at the feet of the cross, we find the other gospel narratives that's where the women were there following Jesus as he was on his way to the cross. And when you read from Luke chapter 8, verse 3, you find out that the people that supported the ministry of Jesus, you have these women who were delivered of demons and sicknesses, were women mentioned in the Bible. And women make the largest number in our churches today. But I have a problem because when it comes to the administration of the church, we find the men always at the forefront. I think Dr. Angélique coming up with a book like this to expose, the work of the women within the church system. It's very important because we have to acknowledge that these women are not just doing this now. They've been doing it even in the time of Jesus. I think that's my contribution today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ba. Another comments? Yes, our colleague, Dr. Peter Krishli.
Thank you for this and the testimonies that are within it. But the work, as I understand it, is testifying to the prevalence of whiteness in the ecumenical movement. I wonder if you would like to highlight how whiteness continues to be present in the ecumenical movement, and for us as for those in the governance level and the secretariat level, how you might challenge us to address it.
This is for me, I'm a young person, for me. So I think, so I think the good news is that World Council has offered, I think, a confessional a confessional platform in its last assembly. I think at that assembly, we named racism as a top issue, at least in the North American context, for example. And it is now a transversal. It is not just a program over here somewhere by itself. It is now transversal for the whole World Council of Churches. I think these kinds of steps and regions, not just the World Council out of Geneva, but the whole World Council and the regions are saying this has to be at the top of the agenda. I think repentance and I think transformation happens first with confession and acknowledgement. I think we have done that. I think we're looking at our history where people have been doing that all along, but have not always been. And I think that's part of the power of this book. Dr. Rena Karifa Smart, when she graduated from Harvard University Divinity School, the first woman to receive the Doctor of Theology of that school. And by the way, not only was Stella Potter there, she was there carrying the cross and wrote the liturgy. She was there with Philip. Just saying. But in her doctoral work at Harvard, she did a whole critique of the World Council of Churches. And she said the very same thing. She said, World Council of Churches happily does acknowledge, but the deed has to also take place. So you've had voices all along saying these things, but the question is the whole house listening to that? And that, I think, is what happened in Karlsruhe. I think the whole house is listening more closely. And so I think this is the period of time for us to make great strides around decolonization, acknowledging where racism exists in institutional structures and also movement structures. I think young people like these young women who are here today are going to push us to do that. And there is their future that we're accountable to. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so very much. We have time for one more comment, one more remark.
Benjamin, we've got two online questions or comments. I'm reading the names as they appear just on the screen. Marilia Alves-Schuler. We can't hear you. Sorry, we still can't hear you. While you try and sort that out, can we for a moment move to Tabitha?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Dr. Angélique, for this opportunity. I'm grateful to be here to launch the book. I'm joining from Sydney, Australia. I'm Tabitha, the daughter to late Dr. Agnes Abuom. For me, really, to celebrate my late mom with these other women. But in Nairobi, 1975, when the WCC was in Nairobi, one of the themes there was confessing Christ, and also another one was human development. And we can see in the journey of these women, they were confessing Christ, but they also had the other issue of human development. And I would just like to see how the church today would like to pursue these themes in light of what's happening in the world, migration, water issues, and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. Shall we try Ms. Schuler again?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, we still don't hear you.
Very sorry for that. Dear colleagues, we will have to close very soon. Maybe there's one more comment here in the room. Reverend Vicky Ashford.
Praise ahead of her time. And I recall that in womanist theology, the term was coined from the concept of being what we in the Caribbean say is force right, which means essentially that you are ahead of your time. And I wonder whether you have a word for those of us, male, female, and otherwise, who are ahead of our time in this season.
Well, thank you, Reverend Ashwood, and thank you for your support over the years, your dear colleague in the faith. And I just want to bow for a moment to the daughter of our moderator who has just spoken. We're so honored to have you with us. Your mother endorsed this book. We had conversations about this book. In fact, your mother, as you know, has written the foreword to the book. And it wouldn't have happened without some of her encouragement along the way. But relative to ahead of her time, I need to say, I think this has everything to do with our faith. God sees what we don't see. And our prayer life, our spiritual life, the devotional life, I think commends us to be able to foresee what it is God is trying to do in the world and not what just human beings are trying to do in the world. And so I think the women are parables of what that looks like. They give us parables, just like in scripture, of what it means to know what God is doing, not just what we are doing, but by the agency and the grace and the mercy of what God is doing in the world. Living a strict kind of devotional life, which is not easy, which all these women did, and in very difficult circumstances, allow them to be ahead of their time, because I believe God is ahead of our time. So that's why the spiritual power, the principle devotional life is so critical to being able to be about what God is doing in the world and not what we are doing in the world. And to serve in an attitude of profound humility as much as we are able, in obedience to that, because God knows things we just don't know and is doing things that we can't even imagine. So I think the key is spiritual life. The key is the devotional life. What's key is relationships you keep company with who are doing the same thing. You can't stay there because that's too comfortable. You got to go out into the highways and the byways, but touching base with those people who are called into that imaginative, creative space when even others don't see it. That's what these women did. And I think that's what we're called to. That's what I think makes us ahead of our time, because ahead of our time is God's time. And I talk about that at the end of the book.
Thank you very much, dear Reverend Dr. Angélique. Thank you very much to you all. It's the most difficult part this afternoon. We close such a vibrant and stimulating encounter. Thank you very much for everything that you have stimulated in us with your booklet. And let me close this 1 hour session with a quote from our General Secretary. I hope that we will continue to tell the untold story and reveal the unknown legacies of courageous and remarkable women as we rewrite his, in brackets, his story, and include her, in brackets, story. Well done to the author, Dr. Jerry Pillay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the co-moderators, to everybody who joined us this afternoon online and here in Geneva, the Ecumenical Center. And for all of you who are here in presence, there is still a possibility to buy a copy and to get a signed copy if possible.
Yes.
Thank you so much. God bless.
You, Sue. So, can we put the picture of me and Reverend?